In the first installment of this series, we explored the ancient notion, common to native traditions across the continent, that the legendary wildmen of North America are really human beings, mutated into their present forms through the workings of some mysterious power. A startling story which appears to support this peculiar hypothesis was printed in the December 4th, 1875 issue of the Ottawa Daily Citizen. The background to this forgotten tale is set in 1871, when the Crown Colony of British Columbia joined the newly formed Dominion of Canada, at that time a small easterly federation consisting of the provinces of Ontario, Quebec, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick. British Columbia had agreed to join Canadian Confederation with the understanding that a great transcontinental railroad, the longest stretch of track in the world at that time, would be built from the Pacific coast, through the Rocky Mountains, over the prairies, and across the Canadian Shield, bridging that western province with the easterly Dominion. In order to determine a safe and efficient route for that iron road, construction of which would commence a decade later, the Dominion government sponsored the Canadian Pacific Railway Exploratory Survey and appointed railroad veteran Sandford Fleming as engineer-in-chief. Fleming organized 3 survey divisions and tasked them with assessing the terrain of what is now Northern Ontario, the Prairie Provinces, and British Columbia, respectively. Each division was subdivided into multiple survey parties, which were assigned to particular stretches of country. Our story is one of a handful of mysteries to come out of this grueling but forgotten undertaking, consigned to oblivion by the shadow of the epic construction project which it made possible. It is set in the summer of 1871, when parties R, S, T, U, and V of the Canadian Pacific Railway Exploratory Survey were tramping through the wilderness of British Columbia under the direction of engineers John Trutch, Walter Moberly, and Roderick McLennan. The tale concerns the nervous breakdown and subsequent disappearance of a German-born shopkeeper named Martin, who is supposed to have sold his business in the town of Victoria on Vancouver Island in order to join one of the surveying parties. There is no mention of Martin's disappearance in the official progress report of the 1871 survey, written by Fleming and the leaders of the various survey divisions. The only misfortunes alluded to in that publication are the confirmed death of a native guide and the disappearance of 6 survey employees, 4 natives and 2 whites, in a forest fire north of Lake Superior. That the laborers' vanishing failed to merit mention in the report, however, is no indication that it didn't happen. In his memoir, Surveying the Canadian Pacific, Commissariat Robert M. Rylett of Division S described the disappearance and probable drowning of his co-worker Jim Maloney, who was sucked under the rapids of the Columbia River on October 7, 1871, on whose fate the official report is similarly silent. Rylett's superior, engineer Walter Moberly, also made no mention of Maloney's drowning in his 1885 memoir. He did, however, recall his dismissal of several troublesome employees deep in the Columbia Mountains, leaving these firebrands to their own devices and washing his hands of their fates in the dying gold town of Wild Horse Creek. That some survey employees might express dissatisfaction with their lot, or, as in Martin's case, suffer psychotic breaks, is understandable considering the hardships they faced in that wild and unforgiving country. As Canadian historian Pierre Burton put it in his 1970 book, The National Dream, no life was harsher than that suffered by members of the Canadian Pacific Survey crews. None was less rewarding. Underpaid, overworked, exiled from their families, deprived of their mail, sleeping in slime and snowdrifts, suffering from sunstroke, frostbite, scurvy, fatigue, and the tensions that always rise to the surface when weary and dispirited men are thrown together for long periods of isolation, the surveyors kept on. The wonder was that anyone worked on the surveys at all. For Martin, apparently, the rigors of survey work proved too much. The following is an account of his bizarre fate, printed in the December 4th, 1875 issue of the Ottawa Daily Citizen, under the headline, Startling Story, a former Victorian running naked and wild on the mainland. The following is an extract from a private letter received from Clinton on Saturday. The person alluded to was an axeman in the employ of a Canadian Pacific Railway survey party in 1871, and suddenly went mad while on the Thompson River and plunged into the woods. From the extract, there would seem to be no doubt that he is still living in a state of wildness. You may perhaps remember Martin, a German who had a store on Kanaka Road, Victoria. He left a Canadian Pacific Railway survey party and was occasionally seen for that season on the mountains. Last winter, in the coldest time, he was also seen by Indians, after he had to cross the Thompson River on the ice. It is wonderful how he managed to exist during the intense cold. A few days ago, he came to the sheep run of Peter Fraser on Stump Lake, between Kamloops and Nicola. He carries his rifle, which was very rusty. He had as clothing what appeared to be a piece of old trousers around his neck, and not another rag or hat. His hair is gray and matted, and hangs down on his shoulders, and his body has become thickly covered with hair, like an animal of the gorilla species. He asked the shepherd for something to eat, and he gave him the remnants of his dinner. The shepherd asked many questions, but received no answer, the wild man appearing to be deaf. After he had finished eating, he said, "That is the first bread I have eaten in 5 years." Whilst eating, he stood leaning on his rifle. The shepherd offered him clothes, but he seemed unconscious of anything said, and walked away. From carrying his rusty rifle, his right shoulder is a little drooped. He carries it in his hand, and walks slowly and erect. The reason he has not been seen more frequently is that he keeps to the high benches and does not appear to want to leave them. He headed towards Nicola Valley. When he first took to the woods, he got into the mountains at the back of Cornwalls and was frequently seen there, but would run away and hide. It seems impossible to live without freezing, with the mercury at 50 degrees below zero, and the inference is that the blood of the insane has a cold-resisting power much greater than that of sane people. Martin's Strange Odyssey, with episodes on the Thompson River, Stump Lake, and Nicola Valley, takes place in British Columbia's interior plateau, a land of low hills, ponderosa pine, and desert terrain rendered uncanny by the many strange stories which surround it, which prompted this author in a previous piece to dub it the British Columbia Triangle. In addition to a number of unsolved disappearances, Gold Rush-era ghost stories, and the intriguing tale of a supposed time slip, this region is home to a number of eerie native legends told by the interior Salish. Among the spookiest of these traditional tales are those involving land and water mysteries, dangerous powers or entities which dwell in certain remote locations, such as particular peaks, alpine lakes, waterfalls, or mountain streams. Those who visit these places are liable to see extraordinary apparitions, hear phantom noises, or experience preternatural phenomena, all manifestations of the area's malevolent elemental denizens. Those who witness these things, without having first prepared themselves by painting their faces black or red, often become sick or paralyzed, and may die shortly thereafter. Believed in some traditions to be the spirits of ancient evil sorcerers, land and water mysteries were sometimes sought out by medicine men and their acolytes, who hoped to harness the power they exuded for their own purposes. Even more disturbing in the context of Martin's story are interior Salish legends regarding the alpine wildmen with whom they share their territory. According to Canadian anthropologist Andrea Laforêt, in her 1998 book, Spasm, Fraser Canyon Histories, 1808 to 1839, the Nlaka'pamux or Thompson Indians, who lived along the Thompson River, on which Martin is said to have lost his mind, believed that the hairy giants seen in the Cascade and Lillooet Mountains from time to time were people who became wild after spending too much time in the mountains. In her book, she quotes Thompson elder Annie York as saying, "The Indians claim that the Sasquatches are human beings, because they are the people who practiced to be medicine men when they were young. When boys or girls are young and want to be medicine men, their father or grandfather takes them up into the mountains, and leaves them with very little to eat. They have to sleep and pray and stay alone, and some of them never returned. They got wild in the woods and never came home again. The Indians claim that is where the Sasquatch came from." One native story which illustrates this disturbing notion appears in Canadian archaeologist Wilson Duff's 1962 article, The Upper Stalo Indians of the Fraser Valley, British Columbia. This story is set near Hope, British Columbia, on the Fraser Canyon, near the traditional border separating Thompson Indian Territory from that of the Tate Indians, the latter being a division of the Upper Stalo Coast Salish. Mrs. Lorenzetto, the native storyteller whom Duff quotes, uses the term slalakum to denote Sasquatch, that word being an umbrella term for both unusual creatures and land and water mysteries. One day, Mrs. Lorenzetto told Duff, the women of American Bar, a few miles above Hope, were out picking berries in the hills. One of them disappeared. The hunters found big tracks and followed them up the mountains until they disappeared. They then had to give up, saying the Slolacooms got her. A couple of years later, the same thing happened. My friend's grandmother was taken away by a Sasquatch. As soon as it touched her, she lost consciousness, and when she came to again, she found the woman who had disappeared earlier, her own relative. The woman told her that she herself would never go home again, because one of the Sasquatches was her man, and she now had a small son. However, she would help her to escape. They had flour and other foods around, which the woman said the Sasquatches had stolen for her and her son. The next day, the Sasquatches went off to hunt and steal food. They also wanted to get a wife for the third one. The women prepared a lot of bread, and the other woman led my friend's grandmother partway home. When she got to the creek at American Bar, my friend's grandmother caught sight of some of her people, who were still out looking for her. She went unconscious because she had been seen with the Sasquatches and wasn't like a person anymore. The people found her and took her home. She couldn't speak their language anymore, and hair had started to grow all over her body. They got some Indian doctors to work on her, and after a long time, she became normal again. Many years later, the American Bar people heard a loud yelling at that same creek. They went there and saw 3 Sasquatches yelling. The woman tried to talk with them, but she couldn't remember their language, so they never found out why they had come. They thought maybe the woman had died, or that one of the Sasquatches was her son. My friend always tells my husband and the other hunters never to shoot the giants, because they might be her relations. Is it possible that Martin suffered the same fate as the berry picker from American Bar, transformed into a hairy wild man by the mysterious power that the natives say haunt the mountains? Perhaps Martin himself was picking berries at the commencement of his extraordinary metamorphosis from a civilized citizen to a wilderness renegade, shirking his duties for a few moments to indulge in the wild blueberries or huckleberries which grow on the shores of the Thompson River. For reasons at which we can only speculate, berries and berry picking is a common theme in Canadian Sasquatch stories. In the next section of this series, we will take a look at another forgotten Canadian wildman encounter featuring these fruits of the forest.